Thanks so much, Arlene. It's really an honor to be able to be on this webinar with all of you today. And thanks so much for taking the time to talk about PFAS. As you heard, this is now a massive worldwide environmental problem, and not just an environmental problem, but a human health problem as well. And I wanted to spend just a few minutes before Tom and Arlene get to talk to you about some of the newer science and the newer information that's coming out in this world, and just kind of give us a brief overview of how we got here, why we're talking about this, and where things might be heading as we go forward. And I'm not a scientist. I'm an attorney. I've been practicing for 30 years at the Taft Law Firm in Cincinnati in Northern Kentucky. The last 22 years or so of that have actually focused on litigation involving these chemicals. And that started back in 1998 when I had a farmer in West Virginia call me trying to figure out why his cows were dropping dead after drinking white foaming water flowing through a creek outside of Parkersburg. And it was when we took that case on in 1998 and started litigation against the DuPont company that we started finding and looking at masses of internal studies and documents going back decades, talking about this chemical that, frankly, at the time I had never heard of, my colleagues had never heard of, our consultants and scientists we worked with had never heard of, called PFOA. And it's one of those C8s Arlene just mentioned, as I think most of you probably know. As I started digging through these documents, what I was seeing was this was a chemical that was completely man-made, didn't exist on the planet prior to World War II, had been invented by 3M. In fact, it was very similar to a related chemical called PFOS, which 3M had also invented and was using to make things like Scotchgard, certain types of firefighting foam. But PFOA was being sold primarily to DuPont, who was using it since as early as 1951 to make Teflon. And they were making it in West Virginia. And this plant making Teflon was the one that was putting waste into a landfill that was generating this white foam that was killing these cows. And so as we started digging into that case and trying to figure out what was this PFOA stuff, what we found out was these chemicals, again, because they had been invented so long ago, they really kind of predated a lot of our whole federal state regulatory systems dealing with chemicals going out into the environment. The US EPA didn't come into existence till 1970. Some of the first federal laws really comprehensively regulating environmental exposure to chemicals came out in 1976. Well, these chemicals had already been out there for decades, and DuPont had been using PFOA in particular since 51. So the focus of the new laws when they came out in the 70s was really on these new chemicals from that point forward. These existing ones that were already out there, was really up to the companies that were making them to alert the agencies, the regulators, the scientific world, if there was information suggesting they presented some sort of substantial risk to human health or the environment. And what we found in these documents, unfortunately, was there was a lot of data looking at the toxicity and the risk of this particular chemical, PFOA, going back to the 60s, all kinds of animal toxicity studies showing multiple adverse effects in different species. And in fact, in the 70s, it was found that this stuff was not only not able to be broken down if it got out into the environment. And as Arlene said, that's why we call them forever chemicals. This carbon-fluorine bond doesn't really break down. They get out there in the environment, they stay there forever. But when they get into living things, they were getting into the blood and sticking there and building up over time. And by the 70s, it was known that this was getting into human blood all over the country and staying there and building up. And so there are all these animal studies from the 60s and 70s. There were actually even workers being monitored and studied by 3M and DuPont throughout the 70s and 80s and 90s. And even some sampling that had been going on, and it had found PFOA was getting into drinking water outside this Teflon plant along the Ohio River back in the 1980s. Yet, because it was still unregulated, none of this information had been shared with the government, with the regulators, with the scientific community. there were no federal or state guidelines and standards. So even though all this information was known about this chemical PFOA, there was all this data showing threats and risk of harm, not only to the environment, but to living things that were exposed. Fact, it was in the drinking water. None of that information was made public. I actually sent a letter to the agencies back in 2001, alerting them to this, that this stuff was out there and needed to be investigated. 2002, 2003, the US EPA started really digging into PFOA. Even brought a lawsuit in 2004 against the company, saying information had been withheld about the risk of this chemical in the environment and to human health. And that led eventually to a settlement. We had a lawsuit for the community that was drinking this in their water along the Ohio River. And under that settlement, we were able to set up an independent panel of scientists. Many of you may have heard of them, the C8 Science Panel, that was able to go out and actually look at all the existing data, all the toxicology studies, all the worker studies, and do new studies of the exposed community. 69,000 people came forward and participated in these new studies, and then looked at all of that data to try to confirm whether or not exposure to PFOA in drinking water was linked to disease. And 7 years went by of doing these studies. And by 2012, that panel had confirmed links with 6 different diseases: kidney cancer, testicular cancer, thyroid disease, ulcerative colitis, preeclampsia, and high cholesterol. And what we saw happen pretty much from that point forward, around 2012, was the US EPA then started looking at these chemicals. In fact, as this information had come out, as the EPA started looking into PFOA, after they sued DuPont, they were able to get the companies to agree to stop making these C8s. 3M had already pulled them out of the market back in 2000. But DuPont and the other manufacturers entered into an agreement to phase out these C8s, the PFOA, the PFOS, over the next 10 years by 2015. So that phase out was in place while this information started rolling in about PFOA and the health effects. So that when that information came out about links, US EPA started looking into whether or not to set nationwide drinking water standards. And one of the first things they had to do was figure out whether this chemical was occurring nationwide. So it got added, PFOA and PFOS got added to the unregulated contaminant monitoring rule. And that data started being collected for the first time in 2013 and 2014. And what we saw was PFOA and PFOS, sure enough, were being found in drinking water, not just in West Virginia, not just outside the Minnesota plant where this stuff was made by 3M, or in New Jersey outside of one of the other DuPont plants, but all over the country. And in 2016, an article came out in the New York Times that was sort of summarizing this whole story of how we found out about PFOA and the health information, and the fact that this stuff was being found in water all over the country. And that triggered a lot of pressure on the agency to finally come out with a drinking water guideline, which they did in 2016 of 70 parts per trillion. And that really prompted the Department of Defense, which knew that these chemicals, PFOA and PFOS, had been used in firefighting foams in particular, the type of firefighting foam, AFFF, aqueous film forming foam, at military bases and airports and fire stations all over the country. So lists were created of hundreds of sites across the country where these foams may have impacted the water. So people went out and started sampling for that. Beginning in late 2016, continuing to this day, new communities all over the US and now worldwide, Australia, Italy, Germany, Japan, are finding these chemicals outside military bases, airports, fire stations because of the foam. And that's because people are starting to kind of try to look back upstream to where this stuff is coming from. And what we've seen is a massive new wave of litigation now by communities, water providers that are having to deal with these chemicals in the water and having to figure out how to pay for filtration systems, states that are concerned about impacts to natural resources, to the fish, to the soil, to the air, that are bringing claims now to deal with those costs. A lot of this, and I heard somebody mention right before we started, multi-district litigation. A lot of these cases have been pulled into a new proceeding in federal court in South Carolina, all the cases involving potential impacts from these firefighting foams are now all in this proceeding down in South Carolina that's moving forward. Thousands of cases. And that's just relating to the foams. And as you're going to hear from Arlene and Tom, these chemicals have been used in a massive variety of different products over the years. Not just stain resistant, a nonstick cookware like Teflon, not just firefighting foams, but stain resistant waterproof clothing, carpeting, fast food wrappers, packaging, building materials, you name it. All right. And we really have only started to sort of kind of scratch the tip of the iceberg into the potential sources for this stuff. And so as this information's come out, we started to realize it's not just PFOA and PFOS. As that phase out of the C8s occurred between 2005 and 2015, the manufacturer started bringing out these replacement chemicals, things with a couple fewer carbons that were hoped to be less persistent, maybe less toxic because of fewer carbons. Things like C6s, C4s, those started going out into products and being used and being put out into the commerce. And now the information starting to roll out about what's the potential toxicity of these related perfluorochemicals that share this carbon-fluorine bond. And there's concern that maybe these other chemicals are similar, a similar problem. So what we're now seeing are people saying we need to look at this whole big group. It's not just C8s, it's not just C6s. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of these man-made per and polyfluoroalkylated substances, mouthful, PFAS, that are now out there in our environment. And you're seeing concern not only about their impact in the environment, to soil, to water, but the fact that they're getting in people and they're staying in people. We had litigation, now there's litigation all over the country for people that want to have testing and monitoring to know what is it doing in their blood. We've brought a case in federal court in Ohio trying to do a nationwide class action to have the proper studies and testing done, paid for by the manufacturers, to tell us what this mix of PFAS chemicals will do in our blood. So as this information's come out, what we've realized is when we first focused on the C8s, and those were phased out and people started moving away from those. And we're now seeing that we've got these related chemicals, and there's concern now about these chemicals as well and different materials and the need to possibly move away from those. And companies are coming forward and taking steps to move away from them and announcing that this is what they're trying to do to give people options to move away from these chemicals. And I know I'm talking too long. Arlene and Tom will talk about that. But I just thought it was important to give you sort of this historic context of how we got to where we're at now, talking about these chemicals in so many different products and so many different PFAS chemicals, and the potential concerns that are driving litigation and that are driving companies to move away from these chemicals to help protect not only the consumers, but public health and the environment. So thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you today.